Good morning and welcome to day 2 of our national gathering. We welcome all of you back and like to share with you today a prayer written by Sister Joanne Gallagher of the Boston Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And it's the prayer in the spirit of the two Trinities. The two Trinities is central to the spirituality of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And so we pray this morning, God of inclusive love, Christ of outpouring love, Spirit of communal love, breathe in and among us. We join together with the zeal of Jesus, courageous, humble, and self-emptying, the fidelity of Mary, filled to overflowing with every kind of grace, and the cordial charity of Joseph, grounded in relationship with God and neighbor without distinction. We are rooted in the rich heritage of those who have gone before us. We are seized by the same love which impelled them to be in relationship with the reality of their changing world and changing times. We are inspired by their vision, their integrity, and their fidelity. We continue in this, our changing world and times, together with courage and hope. You, O God, every sister and brother throughout the world, our earth and all creation, call us to embrace ever-widening circles of communion. May this moment in time and this time of shared reflection together impel us to action, action that stirs up love, is connective and inclusive, and deepens our commitment to move ever toward oneness as your people. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. And I now ask President Donald Bloomgarden to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sister Marie. It's a real honor for me today to introduce Elizabeth Johnson. I first came to know her when I became president here at St. Joseph's, although I knew of her before I came here. And one of the first things that Sister Beth did was she gave me a really beautiful copy of her book, The Quest for the Living God, but she gave it to me in German because that's my childhood language. And in it, she wrote a very beautiful dedication in which she ends the dedication to be saying, "A blessing on your head." And I so appreciated that. And I think that her blessing on my head has been a powerful blessing for our entire university. She was certainly, as a trustee, a member of our board of trustees, an incredibly powerful force. And as all of you probably know, she's been an incredibly powerful force in the world. I think, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure she's the only theologian who has a Wikipedia article that is longer than Taylor Swift's. So that shows you the kind of rock star we're talking about here. Sister Beth is a professor emeritus from Fordham University. She was called by the National Catholic Reporter one of the country's most prominent and respected theologians. I would argue that she's one of the world's greatest theologians, and certainly right up there, in my opinion, with Teilhard de Chardin or Karl Rahner in the impact that she's had in her writings. So powerful and so enjoyable to read. I went back and I took a look at a section of one of her latest books, and I think she's probably going to touch on these things today a little bit. Ask the Beast, Darwin and the Love and the God of Love. And in there, I'm just going to read a short passage. First of all, there's a quotation from the book of Job. Ask the beasts and they will teach you, the birds of the air and they will tell you, ask the plants of the earth and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of every human being. And then Sister Beth continues, If you interrogate the flora and fauna of land, air, and sea, the text suggests their response will lead your mind and heart to the living God, generous source and sustaining power of their life. In their beauty, their variety, their interacting, their coming to be and passing away, they witness to the overflowing goodness of their Creator. They even teach something about human beings, that these members of the community of life also receive their every breath as a gift from the same immensely immeasurable giver of life. That passage alone, we could spend many hours talking about. And it's illustrative of Sister Beth as a member of a long tradition of the Sisters of St. Joseph, who have been incredible scholars and have had great minds and have had a huge impact on their students and on the world beyond. So for me, as president of St. Joseph's, to have had Sister Beth on our board, to have had her so closely connected to St. Joseph's University has been a real privilege. And I think all of you today are going to have a wonderful opportunity to hear her thoughts on human beings in the community of creation. And also there will be a question and answer period at the end that I'll be happy to facilitate. And so with that being said, I'll turn it over now to Sister Beth, and I'm looking forward to what she has to say.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Don, for that beautiful introduction. It is a pleasure to be with you all and to share one idea that cuts across our disciplines. The theme of this conference is Forward Together. And let me say, this will be a consideration of forward together, all of us human beings and the whole natural world, which we can call the community of creation. To introduce our reflection, let me invite you to picture the Earth as seen in familiar photos now taken from space. Some people are calling that selfies, Earthlings taking pictures of ourselves with our planet, right? So there it spins, a beautiful blue marble swirled around with white clouds, luminous against the black background of endless space. Now we humans live here, as do millions of other species on and under the solid land, in the fresh and salty waters, and in the air above our heads. In fact, this is the only place where life exists as far as we know to date. And from here, we can look out and see other places, planets and stars, as our ancestors did. And now with amazing new telescopes, we can see ancient galaxies, billions and billions of them. Perhaps someday, creatures from Earth will live elsewhere, but for now and always, Earth is our home planet. And as you know, the awful reality we face is that Earth today is in trouble. Due to human action and inaction, the planet is warming. Severe droughts, wildfires, floods, and storms are wreaking havoc. Hundreds, if not thousands, of species are rapidly becoming extinct. The resulting damage disrupts the lives of ever more millions of people, among them those who become climate refugees. Efforts to care for the Earth are multiplying, as seen in everything from international agreements to lifestyle choices by individuals. These efforts, however, face fierce opposition from political and financial forces, and we cannot underplay indifference. So amid this dangerous and complex scene, what can religions bring to the table? Since religious traditions at their best are bearers of wisdom about ultimate meaning and lay out a roadmap for how to live a good life, most of the world's religions have resources that can nurture ecological care. Pope Francis put his finger on this contribution in his 2015 encyclical entitled Laudato Si, Care for Our Common Home. And I quote, he writes, I would like to show from the outset how faith convictions can offer Christians and some other believers as well ample motivation to care for nature and for the most vulnerable of their brothers and sisters. It is good for the world at large, he continues, when we believers better recognize the ecological commitments which stem from our convictions. And that's the end of the quote. In other words, beliefs have consequences and should count for something in the practical order. And it is here that this presentation this morning hopes to make a contribution. Because with other monotheistic faiths, Christianity holds dear the belief that the one living God created the whole world and loves the whole shebang. This conviction could powerfully move us to care for the earth. And yet it has not led many Christians to do so in a noticeable way until recently. An intriguing story about the 19th century naturalist John Muir highlights the problem. One day when Muir was hiking in the Yosemite wilderness, he came upon a dead bear and stopped to reflect on this creature's dignity. Here was an animal with warm blood and a heart that pumped like ours, one who was glad to feel the warm sun on his fur, and for whom a good day was finding a bush filled with berries. Later, Muir wrote a bitter entry in his journal, criticizing the religious folk he knew, who made no room in their faith for such noble creatures. They think they are the only ones with souls, he complained, the only ones for whom heaven is reserved. To the contrary, he wrote, God's charity is broad enough for bears. So is it? Are black bears, panda bears, golden bears, polar bears loved by the Creator to the extent that in their suffering and death they are affected by God's redeeming power? If so, where does that place us humans in the divine scheme of things? Taking the side of the bears in this reflection, I am going to argue that we humans need to rethink our own identity in relationship to nature. We need to change from thinking that we are masters of the universe to realizing that we are kin with the bears and all other beings in a community of creation loved by God. And I invite us to explore this idea in 3 points. First, the community of creation itself. Second, a powerful obstacle to grasping that we are part of it. And third, remedies to remove the obstacle. So I offer these probes into an ecological theology, not with the expectation that you will necessarily agree, but in the hope that they will stimulate all of our thinking about the sacred importance of the natural world to practical and critical effect. So first, the community of creation. As life has evolved on our planet, it has taken shape in millions of species of dazzling variety, including the human species, all of us interacting with the land, water, and air of different ecosystems. As the nature writer Annie Dillard says, the Creator loves pizzazz. Now, the process of evolution can explain how species took shape in the course of time. But the fact that they exist at all does not explain itself. From ancient times, people facing the vulnerability, the fierceness, and the wonder of life have had the sense that there is more here than meets the eye. As biblical faith sees it, the world's existence is due to the gift of an infinitely generous Creator. This incomprehensible mystery, whom people call God, G-O-D, is sheer exuberant aliveness, an overflowing wellspring of being without origin, without limitation, and without end. In creating the world, the living God freely gives a share in that aliveness to others who are not divine, and we all receive it with creaturely flair. Now, ordinarily, mention of God creating the world takes our minds back to the origin of things, as in the book of Genesis, which starts in the beginning. Right? And people often assume, while never explicitly saying so, that from this initial spark when God created the world, everything rolls along on its own. It is almost as though the Creator's rest on the seventh day extends into a long retirement. Now, what gets overlooked in this short-sighted view is the truth that creation is ongoing. The living God continuously creates. Without this largesse, the sustaining power of God for all creatures, there would be no world at all. Everything would collapse into an ultimately no thing, nothing. One striking metaphor from the British philosopher Herbert McCabe puts it this way: the Creator makes all things and keeps them in existence from moment to moment, not like a sculptor who makes a statue and leaves it alone, but like a singer who keeps her song in existence at all times. So think of creation this way: it's a continuous, in-person, live performance. Trying to understand this, the 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas used the image of fire. The way a flame sets other things on fire, he wrote, the Creator continuously sparks all things into being. Another image he used, the way the sun makes the air bright, the Creator shines the world and all its creatures into their existence at every moment. So this is the basic meaning of creation. An ongoing relationship is at the heart of it all. Now, in the biblical view, why this should happen is due to one reason: love. Book of Wisdom figures it this way, and I quote, "For you love all things that exist and detest none of the things that you have made, for you would not have fashioned anything if you had hated it." Book of Wisdom, chapter 11. Pope Francis draws on this view in Laudato Si when he writes that creation is a gift in which every creature has its own value and significance. Even the fleeting life of the least of beings is the object of God's love, and in its few seconds of existence, God enfolds it with affection. Enfolds it with affection. Commentators note here that Francis may well have had in mind mayflies. After they hatch, these little insects live for only a few hours, during which they must find a mate and lay eggs, and then they die. So ephemeral, but enfolded with divine affection, as are we all. So the continuous creative presence of God receives yet another coloration when we realize that the world is not yet finished. For 13.8 billion years, the universe has been unfolding, with galaxies and their stars forming, merging, breaking apart, and then shaping something new. On our own planet, evolution keeps bringing forth what Darwin used as a lovely phrase. He called it endless forms most beautiful, keep coming forth on our earth. So we can see nature is seeded with promise. It's pregnant with surprise, but the cost is high. The history of life shows that pain and suffering are interwoven with life at every stage. Death is deeply structured into the creative advance of life, which arises in the midst of perpetual perishing. So if we ask, where is the Creator in the midst of this trouble? Bedrock biblical faith answers, here, in ongoing solidarity with creatures crushed by pain and death. God is faithful and does not abandon the beloved creature even then. As the Australian theologian Dennis Edwards mused, the Creator Spirit is with creatures in their finitude, death, and incompletion, holding each in redemptive love, and in some way also already drawing each into an unforeseeable future. The Spirit is with every creature now, with every wild predator and their prey, and with every dying creature, as midwife to the unimaginable birth in which all things will be made new. End quote. So things fall apart, but there is still hope for the future. I will be with you is the proper name of the Creator of heaven and earth. Now, when you look at the planet this way, you have to admit that from a God's eye point of view, human beings do not stand alone as the end all and be all of the world. Rather, we are interwoven with the bear, the squid, the raven, and the bugs. In the lovely words of Laudato Si, we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but joined in one splendid universal communion. It is one of the blessings of our age, I think, that scientific study reaches a similar conclusion by its own distinct methods. We humans are an intrinsic part of the evolutionary network of life on our planet, sharing DNA with other creatures. And all of this life on our planet, in turn, is part of the solar system, which itself formed out of the debris of older exploding stars in the Milky Way galaxy, which itself formed sometime after the flaring forth of the Big Bang. The British scientist Arthur Peacock captures our physical relatedness in a striking example. Why is our blood red, he asks, similar to the blood of other mammals? Because of iron. And I quote, every atom of iron in our blood would not be there had it not escaped from the explosion of a red supergiant billions of years ago, and then condensed to form the iron in the crust of the earth from which we have emerged. So the landscape of our imagination expands when we realize that human connection is so deep that we can no longer define ourselves without including the great sweep of cosmic history and our shared genetic inheritance with other organisms in the evolutionary history of life on Earth. There is but one community of life on Earth. In scientific terms, there is one biosphere. In theological terms, there is one community of creation. Everything is connected to everything else, and we all flourish or wither together. That brings me to my second point, obstacles. There are many reasons why humans, for the most part, have lost this sense of communion with our kin, humans in our day. One is our undoubted abilities of intellect and will. We have the capacity to think symbolically and to express thoughts in verbal language. We ask questions, we invent things, we comfort and heal. We also rape and kill. We have the capacity for the most profound, self-giving love, as well as the capacity for self-delusion and for acts of barbaric evil. Given these abilities, it has become common in religious and secular thought of the modern era to think of human beings as standing apart from the natural world rather than being an interwoven part of it. And here I will zero in on only one factor, but a factor that I think has been particularly toxic in the realm of theology, namely the idea of the hierarchy of being. Now, the backstory is interesting. When early Christianity spread around the Roman Empire, it came into contact with a version of Greek philosophy which taught that the world is composed of two elements, matter and spirit, or body and soul, body and mind. But since divinity is pure spirit, they reasoned that the more spirit a being possesses, the more godlike it is and closer to the divine. whereas the more matter it has, the further away it is. And philosophy used this scheme to rank the inhabitants of the world according to a hierarchy of being. At the bottom was non-living material like rocks, just pure matter, no spirit at all. Higher up were plants. They are alive and germinate seeds. Then come animals higher up still because they have locomotion. And highest on earth are humans with a rational soul and a body. Even higher are the angels, pure spirits with no body. So as I've been accustomed to saying to my students, the hierarchy of being goes from the pebble to the peach, to the poodle, to the person, to the principalities and powers, all under the rule of the primary cause. So instead of a circle of kinship, this model of the world structures the world as a pyramid with humans at the pinnacle on earth. Now, when Christian theology encountered this philosophy, it drew on this framework to teach that humans with our superior spirit rightly rule over plants and animals. In technical terms, plants and animals have instrumental value rather than intrinsic value in God's eyes. They are made for our use. They are instruments for us rather than having intrinsic value in God's eyes. And remember these words. Consequently, at the end of the world, Christian doctrine taught that plants and animals will disappear. Since their purpose is to provide for our needs, once human life on earth is over and we no longer need them for food, clothing, shelter, or muscle power, their goal will be fulfilled and they will cease to exist. Today, feminist thinkers complexify this picture by noting how the hierarchy of being turned inward on the human race itself. And it credited men with having more spirit than women. Men possessed of reason and ability to act are more like God, therefore, than women are, who are identified with emotion and their changing bodies that bleed and bring forth life like Mother Earth itself. Hence, women are by nature subordinate to men, who by virtue of their superior spirit are equipped to rule. A rule, I would note, that can turn violent and exploitative with little compunction. This same hierarchy of being turned even more vicious in the 15th and 16th centuries when Europeans began their vigorous exploration of other lands. Then thinkers in that aggressive entrepreneurial culture took human superiority to mean that the explorers had the right to exploit the minerals and the forests and animals in other lands for profit. Even more malicious was the support this framework gave to white Europeans' men's idea of their own supremacy when they encountered African and indigenous peoples. They assigned to people of color souls of lesser quality with inferior intelligence, identified them more with bodiliness, saw them as closer to animals than to humans. And so Europeans thought, or justified at least, that they had the right to conquer, transport, and enslave millions of human beings for profit. Church teaching, given its commitment to the hierarchy of being, had little to offer by way of resistance to the devastating disruption of whole communities and individual lives. And the terrible racist results of slavery continue to this day. I find it daunting to realize how deeply the hierarchy of being and its anthropology of the elite white male has made its way into the DNA of Christian thought and spirituality. Not only has it prevented equality and justice in the human community, which it has, but with its conviction that humans are rulers over nature, it has opened the door to centuries of unbridled exploitation of the natural world. The lack of concern on the part of many Christian people for the devastation of the earth in our own day can be traced in part to the ongoing influence of this idea. In a word, if other creatures are less valuable in God's eyes, why should we bother? This brings me to the third point. antidotes. There is a thought experiment that may begin to introduce sobriety to minds drunk on human supremacy. It has to do with trees. In the hierarchy of being, humans rank above trees. Now consider, when we humans breathe, we inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. In the presence of the sun, trees do the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Their photosynthesis is largely responsible for producing the oxygen content of the Earth's atmosphere in our day. Take away trees, and humans would suffocate. Take away humans, and trees would do just fine. Probably better, for we would not be cutting them down. So who needs who more? Which is more valuable? And by what criterion? In the area of faith, I think, another antidote to human hubris is a robust creation theology. Drawing on this source, Pope Francis in Laudato Si recognizes that he is contributing something new to Catholic teaching by insisting, quote, "In our time, the Church does not simply state that other creatures are subordinate to the good of human beings, as if they had no worth in themselves and can be treated as we wish. Rather, they have an intrinsic value in God's eyes, independent of their usefulness to us." End quote. Note the very deliberate language here. It is pulling a nail out of the foundation of the hierarchy of being. Other creatures have an intrinsic value in God's eyes apart from their usefulness to human beings. And why? Because God loves them, even the little mayflies. And this leads Francis to a radical claim, and I quote, "The final purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us. Rather, all creatures are moving forward with us and through us toward a common point of arrival, which is God." Now, Laudato Si applies this view to the ongoing catastrophe of the extinction of species in our day. Thousands are going extinct. They're disappearing, right? When a species goes extinct, it disappears forever. Given that evolution requires passing on genes from one generation to the next, it will never come back. Death means the end of life for an individual, but extinction means the end of birth itself for a species. It's the death of birth. In view of our shared identity as creatures of the one loving God, Pope Francis writes, and I quote, "We should feel the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement of ourselves." What an extraordinary idea, that the loss of a species should strike us as if our own body was wounded, or as if we ourselves had lost a limb. In clear language, Pope Francis rolls this community of creation idea all the way to the ultimate future. And at the end of the encyclical Laudato Si, he writes very extraordinary words. Quote, "At the end, we will find ourselves face to face with the infinite beauty of God." Now, he is describing heaven here, which of course is indescribable, but it will be beautiful. And enfolded with affection, we humans will not find ourselves alone. For, quote, "also present will be the whole universe with us sharing in unending plenitude." Indeed, he continues, quote, "Eternal life will be a shared experience of wonder in which each creature, resplendently transfigured, will take its rightful place." I'll read that again. Eternal life will be a shared experience of wonder in which each creature, resplendently transfigured, will take its rightful place. So, to the old question, will I see my dog in heaven? Here is the answer. We can't imagine this, of course, but Francis is drawing out the logic of belief in God as creator, who begins, sustains, and will end. Some years ago, while teaching in South Africa, I gave a public lecture on this very biblical idea that all creation will be redeemed. I had just visited that country's great Kruger National Park and been deeply moved by seeing Africa's marvelous animals roaming in the wild. So I departed from my prepared text to say that lions, hippos, giraffes, impala, wildebeest, storks, the whole lot had a blessed future in store. The local Catholic newspaper disagreed. It ran an article critical of my talk under this headline: "Salvation even for elephants?" Isn't that a wonderful opening question to think about? Why ever not? The Creator is not a throwaway God. We humans do not stand alone as subjects of divine love. In the community of creation, we all share the core identity of being beloved creatures. And for all our human difference as a species, this shared identity makes us kin with the land, the sea, and the sky, with the skunks, the seagulls, the salmon, the spiders, and the sequoias. One day, all of us creatures will be at home in the beauty of God, just as now in time, our common home is the earth. Now, as a deliberate religious teaching, the teaching about creation has profound ethical implications. Once we have truly appreciated the life of the other, then we arrive at a new starting point for our actions and decision making. So to conclude, our times urgently require that we humans develop an ecological sense of ourselves in tune with the belief that all of us on earth are one related community. And my argument is that Christian belief and Jewish belief and Muslim belief, from monotheistic belief in one God who is the creator of the world, has a contribution to make. We might call this a view of an ecological God. If we think this way, then we can begin to change some of the deep-seated behaviors that are driving environmental destruction. We might be able to begin to address our world's galloping poverty, the deity of the market, and our cultural despair. Looking out the window rather than always in the mirror, we will be humbled and delighted by the life around us and begin to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor and step up to protect our kin. James Misher, in his novel The Source, makes this point in a dramatic way. The point being, belief in God as creator leads to ethical behavior toward the earth. As he tells it, in pre-biblical days, people living in a Canaanite village in the Middle East worshipped a God who demanded human sacrifice, including the lives of firstborn sons, in order to ensure the ongoing fertility of crops. A young woman named Timnah recently gave birth, loved her baby son fiercely, and could not accept that he must die. She pleaded desperately with her husband, protested and argued vigorously in this novel, all to no avail. On a given day, amid great public ceremony, her husband walked to the altar and handed the infant over to the priests, who tumbled the little bundle into the flames. Months later, still consumed with grief, Timnah attended another community ceremony. And here's the words from the novel. And while others celebrated, she walked slowly homeward, seeing life in a new and painful clarity. With different gods, her husband Orbal would have been a different man. With different gods, her husband would be a different man. The spiritual wisdom in this fictional woman's insight is profound. Imagine a continuous public understanding of the living God as a passionate creator and lover and redeemer of the whole earth and all its creatures, humans among them. Imagine that people of faith pray, preach, teach, repent, lament, celebrate, praise, and act responsibly so as to do justice to the heart of the living God who pours out love on all human beings, as well as on the soil, the waters, and the air, and every little bird that falls to the ground, as Jesus said. With a different God, the people of God would be a different people. Then the moral law to love your neighbor as yourself would include the bat and the bee. Then the prayer to have mercy on us would expand to include not only us needy human beings, but also the whole struggling community of life of which we are a part. Then action on behalf of social justice and eco-justice would flow as an intrinsic part of Christian living, and that's something just added on. Ignoring this view keeps people of faith in their churches, their synagogues, their mosques, locked into irrelevance, while a terrible drama of life and death is being played out in the real world. By contrast, being converted to the earth as members of the community of creation sets us off on a great adventure of mind and heart, expanding the repertoire of love, of our love. And as educators, we can bring this insight into the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Beth, for that. There's so much there that we could talk about, and I certainly invite all the participants to send in their questions, and to the degree I can, I'll try to raise some of them with you. As you were speaking at the end, it reminded me of a passage in the autobiography of Carl Jung, where he talks about some of the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. And in there, he mentions that the Catholics have the advantage over the Protestants in that with the institution of the saints, there's a constant change and renewal because these new saints are added to the church all the time, whereas he saw his Protestant religion as very static and unchanging for that reason. So I think in a way he was touching upon that issue of how do we keep the faith alive and relevant as time goes on. So I think the idea of with different gods, and of course by that we mean with a better understanding of God and a kind of transforming our understanding of God, which you touch on, of course, beautifully in the quest for the living God, that is the way to stay connected to relevance. And that goes for all of our institutions, including higher education.
Right. I would say what I did in this talk, given the limitations of time, was just to lift up one thing. I mean, there are a million religious ways of going about this. But in my view, for a religious community, whoever they think God to be is what they think is the highest truth, the greatest good, the most appealing beauty, like everything that's wonderful you think about, that's God. And so it's the key point from which flows back to the community and to all individuals in it, a certain pattern of behavior, a certain way of living in accord with that God. So our idea of God has been very anthropocentric, very focused on ourselves. And it's not that we're not needy. It's not that we're not sinners. It's not that we don't need all the grace that's possible, but we have shut out the whole rest of creation pretty much in Western way of living Christianity. And I make the point, Eastern Christianity has been very different because they've kept the cosmos in the picture. even in the icons and in the celebrations of liturgy and so on. So what we need to do is wake up to how narrow our vision has been and expand it. And what I find delightful, truthfully, as a theologian, is that once you start looking around, the scriptures are filled with this image, and so is our tradition. If we just knew how to redo our imagination and open up to all of that. So it's not like we need to find a new religion or a new God. We need to do justice to what's already there that we forgot about.
I think too, your comment about the hierarchy of being, it reminded me of another author, Jaimito Doderer. He wrote a short story about art, and one of the things he said in there was der Zweck tötet die Kunst, which means the purpose kills art, and by that he meant that by focusing only on one purpose, we actually destroy the beauty around us. And I think that, you know, you see a lot of that, right, in the theological viewpoint, which is so centered on man's journey to the exclusion of all the nature around us, which we see as somehow irrelevant or unimportant because it's not a part of that original vision that we seem to have created.
Right. I came to this as a woman. You just used the word man there in an inclusive sense. I know you meant it, but as a woman, and then becoming conscious of feminist theory, and then as a feminist theologian, the connection that has been made by men between women and the earth has put women in that subordinate position to serve men. That's the purpose of women and the animals and the plants and so on. So I am passionate about this hierarchy of being needs to be dismantled. And then, of course, and we see more than in terms of today with racist consciousness growing, how this has also affected people of color, and then also in terms of class, people of the poor. In other words, it's the elite white male who stands at the top of that hierarchy of being, and I would love to see it come down.
Yeah. Well, I think that hierarchy of being also extends into our educational institutions.
Yeah.
Right. You know, that idea of how we approach almost everything, it seems to permeate it, and in the institutions, in my opinion, that are failing, that is the most pronounced trait. You know, that inability to understand that the hierarchy is actually destroying the institution is really an important part of it. Another question I was thinking of, you know, I know in your book on Ask the Beast, you talk a little bit about other religious figures that have had a real sense of the community of creation. Can you speak to some of the other figures in religious history that had a good grasp of this, and maybe those that are listening might find some pleasure in reading some of their writings?
Right. Let me begin that by saying you can go very far afield in a good way from the tradition of Western Christian theology. And you can see, as I mentioned, Orthodox Christianity. Also, there's a great deal of Asian religion that has reverence for nature built in to the DNA. There is a Chinese way of painting. You see the little human person and the great mountain with the waterfall coming down and the little person. You know, there's a reverence. We fit into a larger scheme of things. Taoism, for example, Jainism, Buddhism. So there's a vast wealth here of religious wisdom that can serve. But in terms of your question, particularly the Western tradition, of course, Francis of Assisi, you know, his wonderful thinking of other creatures as brothers and sisters, and all his prayers and all, even the words Laudato Si are from his opening prayer of the creatures. Praise to you for all your creatures. Praise to you with all your creatures. All creation is praising God. But there is a tradition, for example, of Celtic spirituality coming out of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, of tremendous sense of the sacredness of nature and the spirit that is in nature. And Bridget, for example, Patrick, some of the Celtic saints you mentioned saints, carry that forward as well. You go back to the early centuries of Christianity, Irenaeus, the great writer Irenaeus, never says humans without saying and the whole world. I mean, included in that vision. You could go on and on. There are quite a few. In the medieval mystics, there's another whole group there. I think of Julian of Norwich and her famous meditation. She had a little hazelnut in her hand, and it was such a tiny little thing. And then she realized it was the earth in her vision. And how can it exist? It's so tiny and small. And Christ spoke to her and said, it exists and always will because God loves it. And so she had this sense of the creation as beloved of God. And she goes on at more length. So to read Julian of Norwich is great on this too. Hildegard of Bingen, a number of women mystics had that vision. There's quite a few. Yeah.
I think, it also points to the fact that even today, psychologists talk about the importance of being in nature for human well-being. And
Yes.
we live in a world now where many people are so detached from the natural world that it's rare that they would hold something in their hand that was natural, right? And
Right.
so I think that's kind of a part of a general problem. I have a question here from one of our listeners. Does the misinterpretation of the creation stories for humans to have dominion over or to rule over creation and add to confusion over our place in the circle of kinship?
Fabulous question. And the answer is yes, it does. Because it was misinterpreted. It was misinterpreted. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, they're two creation stories. One has been much more influential, the 6 days, and each day something else is created and God tells it, go multiply and be fruitful and so on. And the last day you get to human beings created in the image and likeness of God. And God says to them, besides be fruitful, says, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the cattle of the ground, and so on. And that in our day, starting in the Middle Ages, especially in the age of exploration, got interpreted as dominion means domination. So you have the right to rule, see, and hierarchy of being supported that. But in context, if you read back when Genesis was originally written, dominion was a function of royalty. If a king had such a big kingdom that he couldn't get around, he appointed representatives to go and make sure that his will was being done, the law was being carried out in those parts. And those representatives were said to have dominion. It's like an ambassador kind of, or to say, this is what the king wants, you see. Now, if you look at the mandate to have dominion given to humans in Genesis 1, God has just created this enormously varied, gorgeous world. It tells it to be fruitful, wants it to multiply, and then says to the humans, and have dominion. It's a vocation. It's a call to service. It's represent me and see that it all flourishes. Because this God doesn't want it to go extinct or get ruined, And so it's the way humans are supposed to serve and protect, so to speak. Well, Genesis 2, the whole thing begins all over again. God gets down and dirty in the mud and creates a human form and then breathes into its nostrils the breath of life. And then you have the human being. The animals are made from the same dust of the earth, and they have the same breath of life in them. And the same with the vegetation is made from the dust of life and has the breath in it. So we share across the board, material and spirit in Genesis 2, all of us together. So this business again of humans at the pinnacle of the hierarchy of being is not in accord with the Genesis stories. But we, of course, in the West have made them be that way. And I have to say, the driving force has been profit and power. Even today, the financial pressures to destroy the earth and make a profit. And who cares about future generations? It's very strong. There's a headline in this morning's New York Times with regard to the Gulf merger of the Saudi Arabian Gulf League and the US Golf League. And the headline is simply this: money wins. And I think that's a driving force in this, but you do not find that in Genesis. If you read it in the context in which it was written, and of course in the way it was preached for centuries until we got into our, we're the greatest mode.
Well, Sister, I want to thank you so much for your thoughts today. I want to thank the listeners for their wonderful questions. I couldn't get to all of them, but this is a chance to scratch the surface on two things, really: this problem and the issue that you bring forward, the community of creation, and antidotes to some of the obstacles to understanding it. But also it's a chance for so many people in the larger community to get to know you and the incredible work that you've done, the great scholarship, and the beautiful writings that you've created. And I encourage everyone who's watching today to immediately go out and buy as many of Sister Beth's publications as possible. You will not regret it. They are a source of endless inspiration, just as the sister has been to St. Joseph's University. So thank you so much today for speaking with us and being a part of the presentation.
So much. It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
And Martha, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, President Baumgarten. Sister Beth, I'm so thankful for your presence and words today. You have inspired us to see anew, and you have expanded our imagination and our community, and we are so grateful. Thank you. Our next and final session on the future of higher education will begin in just a few minutes, in fact, 3 minutes. So take a quick break, grab a coffee, take a stretch break. We'll see you here in about 3 minutes while we get set up for our next session. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the last session of this amazing 2 days of discernment and discussion together. Today, we're going to be listening to one of our colleagues, Dr. Harry Dumais, who will be speaking to us around the challenging times for higher education and what we should be doing together. Dr. Harry Dumais is the president of the College of Our Ladies of the Elms here in Massachusetts. Prior to joining Elms College, Dr. Dumais was Senior Vice President for Finance and Chief Financial Officer at St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire. He was Chief Financial Officer, Associate Dean for Finance and Information at the Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Harvard University before that, and has also held leadership positions in finance and administration at Boston College and Boston University. Dr. Dumais received a BS degree, magna cum laude, in mechanical technology from Lincoln University, master's degree in public administration from Framingham State University, an MBA and graduate certificate in corporate finance from Boston University, and a PhD in higher education administration from Boston College. Dr. Dumais has consulted internationally on projects related to international higher education and economic development. He is a past commissioner and treasurer for the New England Commission on Higher Education and a member of the New England Commission of Higher Education annual report on finance and enrollment. Dr. Dumais also serves as a board member, treasurer, and member of the executive committee for the Association of the Colleges of St. Joseph, and he serves on several other boards, including Endicott College, Economic Development Council, the Pope Francis Preparatory School, Build Health International Equity, and the Haiti Development Institute at the Boston Foundation. I'd like to now welcome Dr. Dumais for your many, many words of wisdom.
Thank you, Tony, for facilitating this conversation. Good morning, everyone. Let me see if I can share my screen for the host. I'm not able to share my screen, Martha, but it is a pleasure and an honor to be with everyone this morning and to speak about the future of higher education. It's truly an honor to be with everybody. And thank you, Martha, and thank you, the National Gathering Organizing Committee, for the invitation. I'm the president of Elms College, as was mentioned. For those who don't know, we are located in Chicopee, Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts. So I bring greetings from the students, faculty, and staff of Elms College. The only thing more daunting than talking about the future of higher education is to do so in about 20-25 minutes. So I want to make a couple of disclaimers at the outset. I've not had a chance to look into the Elms College crystal ball, so I will not be making any definitive prediction about the future of higher education. We also know that a lot of the past predictions that have been made about higher education have not really come to pass. Higher education institutions are led by people. They're made up of people. People are resilient, innovative, resourceful, creative. People are also irrational, act on impulses and in random ways, and respond sometimes to unpredictable environmental contexts. So it is hard to make definitive predictions about what will happen in organizations led by people. The second disclaimer is that I will not be able to cover all of the major themes that will shape the near or long-term future of higher education. And even for those that I address, I will just be skimming the surface, given the limitation of time and the breadth of the topic for this presentation. So what I will try to do, if you don't mind moving forward for me, what I will try to do with these works these authors that have used as sources for this presentation, and there will be other authors listed on the slides, but these are the main sources for the presentation. Moving forward, really I'll get started from a familiar territory with the fact that it has been a challenging time for higher education, and we all know that. And then I'll step back to look at higher education in a historical context to determine whether there are aspects of the history of American higher education that can help us to put into perspective the current and coming challenges that the sector is facing. Then we'll talk a little bit more about these current challenges and updating them. And then there are implications for institutions like us in the Association of Colleges of Sisters of St. Joseph. And finally, given the theme of this national gathering, we'll finish with some suggestions for how we move forward together. This will be, of course, the beginning of the list of suggestions. Some of these are already in progress between ACSSJ institutions, through the association, through the coordination of Martha. But I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and other ideas on how we can move forward together, given the circumstances that collectively we face, and given those challenges and opportunities that will be identified, so that the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph through our institutions continue for generations to come. An April 2028 article by Boston Globe staff writer Hillary Burns had the provocative title, "Why the Business Model of Small Colleges No Longer Adds Up." The article reflected on the number of small colleges that have closed and reported industry experts' expectation that more small or lesser known schools will close in the future. Of course, this is not the first time that such a prediction of massive college closures has been made. You may remember in 2011, the late Harvard Business School professor Clay Christensen famously declared that half of the colleges in the United States would close or be bankrupt in 10 years because of the advent of massive open online colleges. We all know that that prediction did not come to pass. And what you see on the right-hand side is the rating agency Fitch's prediction for the sector in 2023. Both Fitch and Moody's had unfavorable rating for the higher education sector, with Fitch stating that operating woes await US colleges in 2023. Whether one agrees fundamentally with the doomsday prediction of college closures or not, it's hard to deny that it has been a challenging time for the sector, and that's for a while. Next slide, please. This was the outlook for that Moody's had for higher education in 2018, that outlook being a negative outlook. Next slide. Moody's had also determined that the trend for revenues for colleges had been going downwards for at least the past decade. Next slide. And we all know the prediction for demographic trends that 7-8 years ago, it was predicted that we would have a period of declining of falling demographics for many parts of the region. Next slide. With the New England states, predicted to experience a consistently declining pool of college age students. Next slide. So those have been the conditions that have generally been understood for higher education, at least for the past decade, even before the COVID pandemic. And we also know that COVID exacerbated some of these situations. The question, the interest in looking at the past is, are there lessons from the history of American higher education that can provide us some perspective on these challenges? Brubaker and Rudy write that higher education began in the American settlement because it was the most valuable tool that the Pilgrims had at hand for the transmission and preservation of intellectual culture, to create as close an approximation as they could to the culture that they had been familiar with back home in England. From those early colleges established to prepare the clergy, civil servants, and some professionals, college in the newly established United States developed along the expansion of the US territory as a way to promote economic prosperity. Again, according to Brubaker and Rudy, one can plot on a map the early college belt running from east to west, coinciding to a great extent with the railway belt, which was being laid at that time. Colleges were considered an asset in the fierce competition between the newer American communities in their efforts to attract settlers. As a result, there was a close connection between colleges and communities in early America. But that early college was an elite affair. It was for a few minority. It was not for everyone. Few people truly attended college. During the whole of the 17th century, less than 700 people attended Harvard and only 465 graduated. Expansion of higher education would come in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, with America leading the world in what the sociologist Martin Troe called the massification of higher education. The American higher education system would come to be known as a very diversified system with great access to some form of higher education for almost everyone. Of course, everyone initially was considered to be white males. Other groups, such as women and BIPOC individuals, particularly Black individuals, would only benefit from that expanded access over time. But even as it expanded, American higher education has encountered other moments that would be considered very, or if not extremely challenging. One of those moments was the Independence War. Scarcely any of the 9 institutions founded before 1776 escaped some war damage. Students and faculty were dispersed, buildings either ravaged or converted for use as military barracks, and finances were exhausted, historians tell us. Conditions got not much better. They were probably equally bad, if not worse, during the Civil War, particularly in the southern states. Colleges were practically emptied of students and professors, and institutions within territory of the Confederacy, both public and private, were forced to close their doors. When college enrollment dropped sharply after America's entry into the First World War, the government was concerned because this drop threatened a shortage of scientists, technicians, and medical personnel. The federal government deferred from military service students who are receiving training in these fields. A closer partnership than ever before got established between the federal government and the nation's colleges and universities, some of this partnership being financial. Many of the same problems faced the nation again during the Second World War, only in a somewhat aggravated form, faced by depleted enrollments and rising costs due to war conditions, the colleges were thrown into an even greater dependency with the federal government, on the federal government than during the First World War. Next slide, please. American higher education, we will see, prospered over time because it was viewed as a public good and a private good. I'll come back to that. Next slide, please. And part of that was accomplished because US policies promoted higher education. The federal government intervened in a number of ways to shore up higher education with some landmark policies. Some of these included the Morrill Act of 1862, through which the federal government donated public lands to several states and territories, which they could sell for the benefit of establishing colleges in agriculture and the mechanic arts. This was the creation of the land-grant colleges. The second Morrill Act of 1890 tried to introduce some racial equity in higher education, requiring each state to show that race was not an admission criterion. In this case, a negative, an obstacle to participation in higher education, or the states would need to designate a separate land grant institution for persons of color. The GI Bill, or the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, helped veterans of World War I or World War II. It granted stipends covering tuition and expenses for veterans attending college. And the President Commission on Higher Education, that was gathered by Harry Truman in 1946, produced the report Higher Education for American Democracy and advocated for the establishment of a network of public community colleges. The Higher Education Act, signed by Lyndon Johnson in 1965, increased federal funding to universities, created scholarships, low-interest loans for students. And that was the beginning of Title IV, which covers financial assistance for students. When the USSR launched Sputnik into orbit as the first artificial Earth satellite, the United States became worried about losing the scientific and technological global competition. Sputnik, as some historians tell us, woke the nation up, serving as a focusing event that put a spotlight on a national problem. In this case, the problem was education. Congress responded a year later with the National Defense Education Act, which increased funding for education at all levels, including low-interest student loans to college students, with the focus on scientific and technical education. Next slide, please. And the federal government also increased funding for research in higher education, and research funding for higher education grew tremendously over time, as you can see in the chart. Next chart, please. And friendly higher education immigration policies, along with the focus on providing dollars to higher education, help to encourage the flow of human resources and of students into American higher education, contributing to the growth and prosperity. And so the federal government made these investments, and American higher education prospered because, as I mentioned before, it was viewed as both a private good and a public good. The private good that benefits the individual through a lifetime of earnings. Economists tell us that a person with a bachelor's degree earns 2/3 more over the lifetime than someone with a high school diploma. And also through access to jobs. We know that historically, the unemployment rate has been much lower for someone with a bachelor's degree than someone with a high school diploma. Viewed as a public good, because it benefits the citizenry through a higher tax base, through more educated people to participate in the democracy, and through more skilled workforce for economic development. So those interventions of the federal government, along with rising populations, allowed higher education to enjoy decades of growth and prosperity. But as we saw earlier, the past decade has brought a number of challenges to higher education. So let's look at some of these current updated challenges. First, financially, it will continue to be a challenging time for higher education. As you can see, this chart on the slide shows the financial resiliency for groups of colleges pre-pandemic, currently, and with forecasting over 3 years. And institutions are grouped into elite private institutions, other top tier institutions, other private institutions, large public institutions, or other public institutions, with financial resiliency being determined as strong, moderate, or weak. Interestingly, you can see that currently in all groups, the financial resiliency has increased for all institutions. And this is due to the large stimulus funding that higher education institutions, all higher education institutions, received from the federal government during the pandemic years. But as you can see projected forward in the next 3 years, all institutions will experience a decline, and only the elite institutions or the other private institutions are projected to fare well during this time. Everyone will have a challenging financial time. Next slide, please. And the demographics have not improved. Nathan Graw, who provided a lot of the work for projecting the college age population in the next few years, has updated his earlier demographic predictions in his recent book, The Agile College. And it shows that the situation has not improved, except perhaps for the elite 4-year sector at the bottom right-hand quadrant of on your screen. Everybody else, you can see the trends have been downward, except for the elite 4-year institutions. Next slide, please. That remains particularly true when this is segmented by region for the New England institutions. And you can see that even for the elite 4-year institutions, the trend for New England institutions is declining. Next slide, please. That's expected to be exacerbated by this COVID baby bust phenomenon that is being predicted for a lower birth rate during the COVID years. So that will be down the road for higher education. And so this should be really an asset, but it is happening in an increasingly polarized environment. So you can, this chart shows the increasing diversity in the American higher education student population. As the chart shows, the two bars compare race and ethnicity distribution for college students between in 2019 and projected for, I'm sorry, from 2019 and projected for 2034. And it shows it for the overall 18-year-old population, for those who are expected to attend 2-year institutions, for those who are expected to attend regional institution, those who are expected to attend national institution or elite institutions. Overall, the proportion of non-Hispanic white is projected to decrease during the 18-year-old overall and for each segment, whereas the proportion of Hispanics is projected to increase in 2-year and regional colleges, and the share of Asian Americans is projected to increase in national and elite colleges. Again, this increased diversification is an asset and really an opportunity which American higher education should celebrate. Yet at the same time, we've seen lately increased pressures in some areas of the country on the efforts of to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion on college campuses, with states like Florida actively discouraging those initiatives. Some of these challenges have taken the form of anti-intellectualism and the questioning of the value of a liberal arts education, or even the value of a college education in itself. Next slide, please. So turning to some of the implications of all of the above for the ACSSG institutions, and perhaps for institutions like us, and perhaps keeping in mind the challenges that that the sector has faced in other times throughout the history of American higher education, and how to keep that in perspective, and how those what is happening provides both challenges and opportunities. Next slide, please. The potential implications for institutions like us, as I mentioned, really should be viewed as both presenting a set of challenges and opportunities. And I should point out that this list of potential implications is very much adapted from an article in the October-November issue of Trusteeship magazine called the College of the Future. And it says that students will demand more choices in content and delivery. And part of this is just understanding the factors that shape industrial sectors. Given the increased competition, the decreased demand, students' power, or consumer power, will increase, which means that students will be able to demand more choices, both in content and program length, the types of program that students and family desire, as well as the delivery model for program. Again, we can see this as presenting both challenges and opportunities to meet the needs of those new needs of students. Stakeholders will pay closer attention to the value, primarily vocational value provided by higher education. And that's a challenge and very much linked to the questioning of the value of higher education, higher education being viewed primarily as something to help students obtain jobs. So it will be increasingly challenging for us to demonstrate as a sector the value proposition that our institutions deliver. Students in the future will likely have fewer financial resources. That's a challenge. There will increasingly be a person of color and increasingly be adult learners. And those two other aspects are opportunities. Certainly in the face of fewer financial resources, that will put even more pressure on our financial aid budgets and discount rates throughout our institutions. But having an increasingly diverse student body and having more adult learners provide opportunities for institutions to really demonstrate our ability to serve a diverse group of people and to be responsive to the needs of adult learners. And I'll speak about these as a potential opportunity for us as an association later on. And we'll continue to feel the impact of disruptors in higher education, including massive online providers, as well as other types of providers. edX, Coursera will continue to provide cheap alternatives to a college education. The large online providers, Southern New Hampshire, University of Maryland Global, Arizona State University, and others will continue to increase their market share, providing challenge to some of us. But there's an opportunity for smaller institutions providing online work to be closer to students and demonstrate that we can touch students more closely than the large providers or the low-cost MOOCs. Now, U.S. higher education will increasingly focus on precisely measuring its value and demonstrating its outcome. Again, very much close to demonstrating the value of the education that we provide. And we've seen a trend recently for the government as well as the private sector to rank institutions according to the value, the perceived value, the financial value that they provide. Next slide, please. Several states have assembled commissions to think about the future of work, the future of the workforce. And so in parallel, really the future of higher education, because there are close linkages between the need of the workforce and the education that we provide as a sector that is preparing the workforce of the future. Massachusetts assembled such a commission, and I was privileged to be on the Massachusetts Future of Work Commission. And some of these potential implications, which I see as opportunities, are derived from the work of the Massachusetts Future of Work Commission. The future of work will increasingly include implications from technology, automation, and artificial intelligence. I think we've heard, if you haven't heard, you will hear about robots and computers and AI replacing workers in the workforce. Certainly that's a challenge, but it is also an opportunity because these workers who are displaced will need reskilling and upskilling so that either they can find new jobs or so that they can keep up with the technology. And the future of work will increasingly include implications from the gig economy. Those adult learners that are on our campuses will increasingly be people who are self-employed, not working traditional jobs, who are working, doing DoorDash delivery or working, self-employed as Lyft drivers, et cetera. And so it will be both a challenge and an opportunity to figure out how to serve the needs of these new types of workers, new types of adult learners. The future of work will increasingly necessitate partnerships between higher education, government, and employers to meet the yet to be determined workforce training needs. The jobs of the future have not been determined yet. And so employers, the business sector, will need to have their workers trained specifically for these new jobs. And that provides opportunities for institutions like us and to partner with businesses and the government to meet workforce shortages and to meet the new skills that those new jobs will require. Lifelong learning, I think that derives immediately from that last observation, that lifelong learning will be a key to keeping up with workforce demands. And of course, lifelong learning means workers and students and adult and non-traditional students coming back to our institutions to remain updated. Next slide, please. So some ideas, as I mentioned, some of these are already into very much being in progress, and some of our institutions are partnering on some of these ideas. So some ideas for how we move forward together, turning some of the challenges that have been identified into opportunities. First, the challenge of a reduced pool of traditional undergraduate students. I think it will be increasingly important for institutions to articulate their distinctiveness, to market their distinctiveness. And I think, if each one of us will have to do that by ourselves, but there is an opportunity to collaborate on establishing the distinctiveness of an ACSSJ education. I think, and we've talked about that among the presidents of the ACSSJ. Some of the other sponsoring entities, like the Jesuits, have branded the Jesuit education. There's an opportunity for establishing, to collaborate together to establish the distinctiveness of the ACSSJ institutions as really one of, what could be our marker, is that, we can be seen as institutions where all students feel like they truly belong. As people become increasingly tired of the polarization and divisiveness, think about the appeal of that all may be one. I think that could be one of the distinctive feature of an ACSSJ education. If ACSSJ institutions can be associated with truly inclusive communities where the dear neighbor is embraced without distinction. This is piggybacking on some of the presentation of the panel yesterday that talked about some of the efforts on some of our campuses to create inclusive communities. I think that is an area in which we can, as a sector, really make that our defining characteristic. Similarly, reaching out to international students is an expensive proposition if we're trying to do that individually. But in the face of a reduced pool of undergraduate students in the United States, we could collaborate on reaching out to international students. To the challenge of non-traditional students and lifelong learning, we could collaborate on creating and delivering programs. If one of us has done it, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. We could have a tacit understanding of sharing some of these efforts that we've made, whether we've developed a new programs, a short certificate program, or particularly employer-specific programs, because those will be relationships that we establish individually with employers, and that will not be, that's not an area of competition among our institutions. And so if we've done the work, having a systematic approach for which we can share that and provide, competitive advantages to one another. For our graduate programs, we could serve as feeders for each other's graduate programs. Not all of us offer the same graduate degrees, the same graduate program. So, we could channel some of our students, our undergraduate students who are graduating from our institutions to ACSSJ graduate programs where we know that they are offered. The challenge of financial sustainability, which we know that is very real, and again, the presidents have had a lot of conversations about that. We'll have to continue to figure out and actually come up with outside the box collaboration opportunities, and those would be both to increase revenues, whether it is through joint fundraising, through joint ventures that may not necessarily be academic ventures, auxiliary ventures, but thinking outside the box, and as well as to reduce expenses through course sharing. The association has provided us the Academium platform, really taking more advantage of that in order to think about both offering more academic opportunities to our students, but also to try to reduce costs through program sharing to project sharing, thinking again at areas for collaboration given the financial challenges. As you can see, as I mentioned earlier, that's the beginning of a list of ideas. I'm very eager to hear your own ideas, and I know that the presidents in the association are very interested in continuing to identify and explore and really work seriously on those potential ideas for collaboration. Next slide, please. And I'm concluding on a shameless plug for Elms College. This is an aerial view of our beautiful campus. And to conclude also, on some of the themes that Dunn Garden opened the national gathering with. I mean, even as we are very aware of the challenges that we've outlined, we know that there are some clear and exciting opportunities. And so Dunn opened with the fact that among the presidents, even in the midst of those challenges, we have an irrepressible sense of optimism. I want to conclude with that. At Elms College, we've been talking about realism and optimism. Really being fully aware of the challenges in the environment. So being very realistic about those, but even in the face of this realism, I think, one competitive advantage is to have the ability to clearly define and identify the challenges so that one can turn these challenges into opportunities. So optimism, and also Dunn mentioned the trademark of the Sisters of St. Joseph, if you will, to bring creativity out of scarcity or out of challenging circumstances. This has been the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph. So out of challenges, bringing our creativity together to look to the future with optimism. So with that, thank you for your attention, and that will conclude my remarks.
Thank you so much, Harry. That really was so comprehensive. Even if you felt we were scratching the surface, you really covered it beautifully, and the historical perspective is so important. We are open to questions for Harry and myself, if you have any. So please start to put your questions into the Q&A box, and I will take a look at them and see how we're doing. I should say to you that while I didn't introduce myself fully at the beginning, I'm Toni Hayes, and I'm the president of Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts. And Harry and I have collaborated in the past, and we're at least geographically a little closer than we are to other ACSSJ schools. But the whole notion of collaboration is crucial to our future. And we all do have a great heart for this charisms of the sisters and how we live it and want to continue to carry on that incredible legacy that we all have been charged with going forward. So one of the things that I was thinking as Harry was talking was the whole notion of one of the main parts of the charism of the sisters and in their founding was meeting the needs of the times. And Harry, all that you said about the opportunities, I loved that, because it's very easy for us to think of the opportunity as the cup half full versus the cup half empty. And your way of approaching it really shows us the cup half full, which goes along with Dr. Bloom-Garten's introduction to these whole 2 days. So again, meeting the needs of the times. I see a couple of questions. This would be great. Recently, there have been several colleges, including Catholic liberal arts institutions, that have disbanded the humanities. How do you think the ACSSJ students might preserve, protect, or even expand these offerings?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The institutions are going to have to make tough choices. And it's not choice between one good and one bad. It's choices sometimes between two good things. And institutions will have to sometimes do with things that we think are truly important and needed. And I think coming back to the theme of collaboration, even if let's say between Regis and Elms College, even if one of us were to do away with one area, one program, through academia, through bilateral collaborations, we could still have our students have the opportunities to have those offerings through consortial arrangements and through collaboration. So I think that's one way to to remediate some of those tough choices that institutions will unfortunately have to continuously be making in the near future. So yeah, with institutions that, as you said, that may have reduced liberal arts offering or disbanded some of the humanities offering, having the opportunity for students who are interested in these to have access to these courses and these programs from their home institution, but still, through offerings at other ACSSJ institutions is an opportunity to remedy.
This is a consortium. If we find ways and through the consortium of ACSSJ schools that different majors can be offered, and we do it creatively using remote modalities, that the student still is a member of your own community campus, but otherwise are actually enrolled in courses in other institutions. I think that the next question really, which is a good one, because you and I have talked about this too, Harry, and that is, what opportunities would there be for back office collaboration? For example, do we need several different finance offices? And looking at ways in which we can really consolidate some areas that don't set us up for competition. I think the reality is it's a very competitive market. And so one of the things that we should be looking at is ways where we can decrease our costs while continuing to support our individual institutions' needs.
Yeah, agree. This is something that, as Tony said, we have talked about that individually. We've talked about that among the ACSSJ presidents. The CFO of Elms College, Katie Longley, and I would talk about that all the time about, where are some opportunities for service sharing, and some of this, so the limitations, and we have to be realistic about the constraints to that, because I think everybody really desires to see that, but we've seen not a whole lot of it happening. So let's think about some of the constraints. So if we know the constraints, then we can work to overcome those constraints. One of the constraints certainly is requirements from accreditation. For example, in the New England states, whereas you could collaborate among institutions for a lot of the finance functions, but institutions need to have a CFO. Institutions need to have one person that is dedicated to managing their finances. That's one of the standards for accreditation. So that's, and depending on where you are in the country, accreditation constraints can provide some terms for collaborations around this. Some of the easiest areas that that are often talked about in terms of collaboration are around IT and libraries and those types of things. And those have also constraint. IT, because of the cost of systems, the implementation of systems, and when people can, whether they are in the middle of implementation or whether they're the timing for implementing systems. So that presents up some of the limitations. And of course, around library, which would be, if we were able to have really consortial arrangements around these, but there are limitations by the the publishing companies in terms of what they would allow us to do. But those conversations need to continue to happen because there are with all of the constraints that we have financially, there are great opportunities if we're able to crack the code on where meaningful collaborations can take place.
So that's going to be our job for the rest of the year as we have conversations together around how we can look at back office functions and find ways that we could share through our consortium. I have another very interesting question, and that is, Dr. Dumas, how have you seen the charism at work at Elms help you to move forward during your time there?
Well, I think the charism, and as I mentioned, that all may be one, welcoming the dear neighbor without distinction, and which is something that I suspect it's probably the same on all of the SCSSJ campus. But if you come to Elms College, that's something that everybody values, truly values. It is part of the fabric. And this, particularly in the tough times following the pandemics, remaining united around this idea of we are all one, and we welcome the dear neighbor without distinction has been truly important for us here at Elms College. And so in that way, I would say that, this has been a tremendous asset for me as I lead the college, and for us as we band together to face the challenges that we as a small institution face.
I also think that we talk the talk and walk the walk as ACSSJ institutions. And that really makes this a real opportunity in terms of our diversity and equity and inclusion, because these are not traits, or these are not fads for our institutions. They've been part of the fabric of our institutions since their inception. And so when you look at the demographic shifts and what's going on, these are the student body that we already serve well, and we can only serve them better. And so we need to tout our experience, our expertise in caring for the dear neighbor without distinction, and the many different races, and our openness to diversity and inclusion in our schools. And I think that's a trait that is true of all of our schools, and again, that we do very well.
Yeah, and to use, a business term, that charism can be our branding.
I have another question. We know that our students are increasingly viewing education in a transactional way, which is true of students in every school. How can the mission and charism of the sisters guide us in helping students to see education in a broader way? In other words, how do we navigate between catering to the felt needs or demands of students following the central focus, and yet how do we broaden that perspective as they go for a diploma, engaging I would say, exchanging a diploma for a job. So I think that is the outcome reality. The students and the parents are saying, we want to know that this investment, that the outcome will get the student a job. And we have through the political climate around higher ed, that we have to have outcomes that show value. And unfortunately, the metrics of value right now, and very much emphasized, is how much debt, how much money you'll make when you graduate, and will there be a job when you graduate?
Yeah, and I mean, we say here at Elms College that we want students who graduate real world ready, which means we want students who are prepared to get a job or to continue into graduate studies if that's what they want to do. And I think very much in Elms College is similar to many of the ACSSJ institutions, that the students who come to us need to see their education to help them with social mobility. And so preparing them for a profession is very important. But we also, we say we provide them with liberal arts education that prepares them for a profession. So both aspects are very much emphasized to have a general, well-rounded education. And the other thing that we say is that, we provide a holistic education that helps them to view their spiritual self, their social self, as well as their intellectual self. And so all of that together with, being prepared for a profession, having a well-rounded education that and help them enjoy the good life. That's what we're preparing them for. But really with a very practical orientation to being real world ready, and to have a job or grad school if that's what they choose to do.
Thank you. So Martha, how are we doing? How's our time?
We're doing great. Yeah, I think we're coming to end. So thank you, Dr. Dumais and Dr. Hayes, for giving us much to think about, and the encouragement too to turn challenges into opportunities that really resonated with me. I also found myself reflecting back on the institutional saga presentation yesterday that really highlighted the bold and courageous acts of the founders of our institutions in establishing our colleges. And as we move forward together, I think we're called to take bold and courageous acts together. And I want to thank you both for your leadership at Elms College and Regis College, but also with ACSSJ too. My hope is that ACSSJ colleges and universities, we can act boldly together. Like Dr. Dumais, I want to invite you to share your ideas and be involved in our work as an association. It takes all of us. It takes the village to do this work and be a part of it. So thank you so much for this session. As we bring this national gathering to close, I would like to thank those that helped to organize this conference. Thank you to the committee who worked with me tirelessly to craft the conference program. Please join me in thanking Dave Armstrong from Avila University, Sister Carol Allen from Elms College, Meredith Lynch from Mount St. Mary's University, and Dr. Vernon Shelton from St. Joseph's University. Thank you to all of the St. Joseph's University community that touched some part of this conference. And a special shout out to the IT team led by Michelle Papajohn and Lachelle Luca Torto. I am so thankful for the team behind the scenes today and yesterday to make your experience at this conference a positive one. Thank you too for those that offered their generous sponsorship to be a part of this national gathering, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, St. Louis Province, St. Joseph Educational Ministries, Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet and Consociates of the St. Paul Province, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield, and the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. We are so honored to be a part of this work that you all have started and be a part of the legacy and the continued work of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And a huge thank you to each of our member campuses and member presidents. We would love your feedback for the event. At the end of this Zoom session, there will be a link, and you also receive an evaluation link later by email. Please share your experience of the conference with us so that we can help plan another conference that meets your expectations. Whether it is your first time attending an ACSSJ program or you have been involved for many years, we thank you for being part of this ACSSJ's national gathering, and I hope you will continue to be involved in ACSSJ. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Sister Marie and Dr. Sheldon to send us off.
Thank you, Martha, and to everyone. We would have loved to host you here in New York. Hopefully, when the years to come, we'll have that opportunity. But as we close, I want to just say it's been great to be with all of you virtually for these last 2 days. We have received input from our speakers and have shared with one another. And we invite you to just take a moment or take moments, even in the days to come, to consider the following questions. What surprised you? What has inspired you? And what has challenged you? So let us gather the graces and let us continue to reflect on all that we've learned and gathered these last 2 days.
And let us pray. Loving God, we recommit ourselves to service of the dear neighbor in the ministry of education at our institutions inspired by the Sisters of St. Joseph. Grant us enthusiasm for the task you set before us. Give us the joy of good companionship and make us generous in sharing our learning with our colleagues. Open our hearts to accept all people, especially those most different from ourselves. And now we look to Joseph. God of great love, your son Jesus was nurtured by St. Joseph. May we look to Joseph as our model of justice, gentleness, and humility. May we, with Joseph, nurture the life of Christ in our lives and in the lives of others, uniting all people and all creation with God and with one another. May Joseph's life inspire us to be a hopeful, healing presence within our world. and we say, amen.
Thank you
Amen.
all. Thank you. His mother's in.